I'd been working as a night watchman at this old, rundown building for a few weeks. It was eerie, dark, and the place held a strange vibe. Every night felt like a horror movie waiting to happen. Most nights were quiet, except for the usual sounds, creaks, rustles, and the wind howling through the corridors. One night, things took a terrifying turn. I was doing my usual rounds when I heard faint whispers. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew the building was abandoned, and anyone inside after hours wasn't supposed to be there. My instincts told me something was wrong. I followed the whispers, trying to be as quiet as possible. The building had countless rooms and corridors, and in the dim light, it was easy to get disoriented. I felt a chill run down my spine as I crept closer to the source of the sound. There, in the distance, I saw shadows flickering. My pulse quickened, and I could hear my heart thumping in my ears. I tried to steady my breathing, keeping out of sight, but wanting to see what was happening. My curiosity was tinged with fear. As I got closer, I could make out figures masked and dressed in dark clothes. They were sneaking around, whispering to each other, their voices filled with malice. I hid behind a pillar, watching, trying to make sense of what was going on. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. These trespassers weren't here for harmless mischief. They had tools, bags, and from the way they moved, it seemed they were here for something more sinister. My stomach turned. I knew I had to do something, but fear gripped me, making my movements sluggish. I reached for my phone to call the authorities, but my hands trembled. I didn't want to risk making any noise and alerting these intruders to my presence. One of them, the apparent leader, started drawing symbols on the wall, a dark, ominous circle. My breath hitched, and a cold sweat broke out on my forehead. What were they planning to do? It all felt wrong, twisted, and dangerous. They started to mutter in a language I couldn't understand. The atmosphere grew heavier, and a sense of dread washed over me. I wished I could leave, but I was rooted to the spot, unable to tear my eyes away from the scene unfolding before me. Suddenly, they stopped and looked around, sensing something. My heart skipped a beat. Had they heard me? Were they coming in my direction? I pressed myself further into the shadows, praying they wouldn't find me. Thankfully, they moved away, continuing whatever eerie ritual they'd been performing. I tried to calm my racing heart, but fear had me in its grip. I knew I had to act fast and get help. I slowly backed away, my footsteps barely making a sound. As I reached a safe distance, I ran as quietly as I could, leaving the building behind. I dialed 911 as I sprinted, explaining the situation as best as I could, hoping they'd arrive in time. The police arrived at the building, their sirens piercing the night. I guided them to where I'd seen the trespassers, my hands shaking as I recounted the chilling scene. They searched the area thoroughly but found no one. I felt a mix of relief and fear. What were those trespassers planning? Had I interrupted something sinister? It haunted me for weeks, the fear never truly leaving me. I still shudder thinking about that night, the malevolent intentions I witnessed, and the questions that linger, questions I may never get the answers to. I worked nights at this gas station. It was a quiet spot on a desolate road, surrounded by darkness. Most customers were just passing through, but sometimes there were these encounters that just didn't sit right. One night, a car pulled up, and the driver seemed jittery. He wore out over his head, hiding most of his face. He filled up his tank but didn't say a word, just stared at me with these cold eyes. When I asked if he needed anything else, he mumbled something and drove off. Something about him made my skin crawl. Then, a woman walked in. She looked normal at first, but as she browsed the aisles, her behavior turned strange. She kept whispering to herself and glanced at me every so often with this eerie smile that sent shivers down my spine. When I offered assistance, she abruptly left without buying anything. As the night wore on, more unsettling customers showed up. One guy had a wild look in his eyes, constantly fidgeting, asking weird questions about the store's layout. Another wore a trench coat, keeping it on despite the heat. He paced around, eyeing me as if I was the one to be feared. It wasn't just their looks, it was the feeling they gave off. Something was off, sinister even. Each one made me increasingly nervous, and I found myself glancing at the security cameras more often. Then, a group of rowdy guys arrived, laughing too loud and moving too quickly. They seemed to intimidate the other customers, making them leave hastily. I tried to remain calm, but my heart pounded as they approached the counter. They made crude jokes, asking personal questions that made me uncomfortable. I did my best to ignore their behavior, hoping they'd leave soon. But then, they started blocking the exit, talking amongst themselves in low voices. Panic crept up on me. What were they planning? I tried to focus on the tasks, hoping they'd tire and leave. But one of them, the leader I guessed, leaned over the counter, locking eyes with me. His grin widened, and it sent a chill down my spine. He whispered something to his friends, and suddenly, they were all looking at me. I felt trapped, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do. I fumbled with the phone, trying to call the police without alerting them. But the leader, he could sense my fear, and he laughed, mocking me. They didn't buy anything, just left, but their words lingered in my mind. Their intentions were crystal clear, and I feared what might have happened if I hadn't acted calm. As they drove away, relief washed over me, but I couldn't shake off the terror of what might have been. It made me question my safety at that place, wondering if I was truly alone. I kept looking over my shoulder, wondering if they'd return, turning every sound into a possible threat. The night dragged on, but the fear lingered. I was on edge. Every car that pulled in made me tense up. It felt like an eternity until the dawn finally broke. I locked up the station, got into my car, and drove home, constantly checking the rearview mirror. That night changed something in me. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread, the fear that someone might come after me. I worked the night shift at the hospital. The night was silent, the corridors dimly lit, and the rooms mostly quiet. But some nights, things happened that I couldn't explain. There was this one patient, Mr. Johnson, in room 213. He was recovering from surgery, but every time I walked by his room, he was awake, staring at the wall with these wide, unblinking eyes. He never acknowledged me, just kept his gaze fixed, which sent a chill down my spine. Then, there was Mrs. Carter in room 227. She'd been here for weeks, battling an infection. But she would wake up in the middle of the night, screaming about someone being in her room, despite it being empty. She was shaking, her eyes darting around, pleading for help, but there was no one there. It wasn't just the patients, it was the atmosphere that felt eerie at times. The lights flickered occasionally, and strange noises echoed down the empty halls. The whole place felt suffused with an eerie energy, making me feel on edge. One night, as I made my rounds, I heard murmurs coming from the empty room 240. I cautiously pushed the door open, expecting to find a patient in distress. But the room was empty, just an empty bed and a stillness that made my skin crawl. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was probably just the air conditioning. Then, there was the patient in room 219, a young man recovering from an accident. He was usually quiet, but one night, he started talking to himself, whispering about someone watching him from the corner. I tried to calm him, but he just kept staring at the empty space, terror in his eyes. As the nights passed, these occurrences became more frequent. Patients would talk about seeing shadows or hearing whispers in the dark. Some even claimed they were being watched by unseen figures. I tried to dismiss it as hallucinations or paranoia, but the fear in their eyes felt real. One night, as I checked on a patient, I heard a faint, eerie melody echoing down the corridor. It sounded like an old music box, soft and haunting. I followed the sound, and it led me to the abandoned wing of the hospital, the part they closed off years ago. But the music was coming from there, drifting through the silent halls. I hesitated, my heart pounding, but curiosity got the better of me. I pushed open the creaky door and stepped into the darkness. The melody grew louder, guiding me deeper into the abandoned area. The air was thick, and an unsettling feeling settled over me. I followed the sound until it suddenly stopped. The silence was deafening. That's when I heard it, a whisper, barely audible, right behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just the empty corridor, the dim light casting eerie shadows. I raced back to the main wing, shaken. I tried to convince myself it was a figment of my imagination, but that feeling of dread lingered. Something about that place felt wrong, like it held secrets I didn't want to uncover. The next night, I was attending to my duties when I heard footsteps coming from the closed-off area again. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I stood there, listening intently, trying to make sense of it. But then, I saw shadows moving along the walls, shapes that shouldn't have been there. My breath hitched as I watched the shadows, feeling an inexplicable terror grip me. I wanted to leave, to run, but my feet were rooted to the ground. The footsteps drew closer, echoing louder with each passing moment. Suddenly, the lights flickered, and in that brief moment of darkness, I saw figures, silhouettes of people, standing at the edge of the abandoned wing. Their presence felt wrong, sending a shiver down my spine. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, and I turned and fled, not looking back until I was back in the main corridor. I felt an overwhelming sense of dread, my mind racing with questions and fear. What were those figures? Who or what was making those noises? I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but the fear that I felt was too real. I wanted to leave, to quit my job, but I needed it. So, I forced myself to carry on, to keep my eyes straight, and to ignore the unsettling occurrences. But the fear lingered, making every sound, every whisper, seem like a haunting presence. I couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off about that hospital, about those empty corridors and the patients' whispers. I worked my shifts, keeping my head down, but the fear never left me, making every night shift a dreadful experience. I worked the graveyard shift at the hotel, and the only sounds were the occasional creaks of the old building and the soft hum of the air conditioning. Most nights were uneventful, but there was this one night. It was around 3 a.m. when I heard footsteps coming from the hallway. I glanced at the security monitors, but they were all blank, no one in sight. I shrugged it off as a trick of the mind and went back to sorting through paperwork. Then, the phone at the front desk rang. I picked it up, expecting to hear a guest or maybe someone lost in the building. But when I answered, there was only static on the other end. I frowned and hung up, feeling a sense of unease creeping up my spine. I turned my attention back to the monitors, and that's when I saw it, a figure in the corner of one of the screens. It was blurry and flickering, like an old TV channel with bad reception. I rubbed my eyes, thinking it was just tiredness playing tricks, but the figure remained, disappearing and reappearing in different spots. I stood up, feeling my heart race. There was no one in the building except for me, yet that figure kept appearing on the monitors, moving through the halls, sometimes just standing there, staring into the camera. I tried to brush it off as a glitch, but then the lights began flickering in sync with the figure's appearances. Panic began to set in, but I couldn't just abandon my post. I had to investigate. I grabbed the flashlight and cautiously made my way down the hallway, the dimly lit corridor seemingly longer and darker than usual. The air felt heavier, suffocating almost, as if something was lurking around the corners. I reached the spot where the figure had been seen on the monitors. The hallway was empty, silent except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. But as I turned to head back, I felt a chill run down my spine. There, in the reflection of the window, I saw someone standing behind me. I spun around, but there was no one there. My heart raced, and I quickened my pace back to the lobby, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. Back at the front desk, I sat, trying to calm my nerves. That's when the static returned on the phone. I picked it up, my hand trembling. This time, there was a voice, soft whispers that I couldn't understand, like distant echoes of conversations long gone. I slammed the phone down, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to leave, to run out of that place, but I couldn't abandon my duties. I felt trapped, surrounded by an eerie silence that was broken only by the occasional creaks and whispers. Then, the lights started flickering again, this time more aggressively. The walls seemed to groan, and the air grew thick with an oppressive darkness that pressed against me. I looked up at the security monitors, and that figure appeared again, closer this time, its distorted form sending a wave of terror through me. I blinked, and when I opened my eyes, the figure was gone, replaced by a mirror image of myself, but distorted and twisted. I stumbled backward, knocking over a stack of papers. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead as I realized that I was the only one in the lobby. The figure in the monitors, the strange occurrences, they were all centered around me. Panic seized me as I felt a chilling presence closing in. I ran for the door, desperate to escape the oppressive and inexplicable horrors that had consumed the hotel. The echoes of whispers and the flickering lights followed me as I sprinted out into the cold, dark night, vowing never to return. I was closing up the auto shop, just finishing the last few repairs on a car when I heard a knock on the door. It was late, well past midnight, and I wasn't expecting anyone. I hesitated, looking through the window to see who it was. There was a figure standing outside, their face obscured in the dimly lit night. I approached the door cautiously, unlocking it to peek out. The figure was a man, disheveled and panicked. He pleaded for help, claiming his car had broken down a few miles away. He looked desperate, and I felt a pang of sympathy. Without much thought, I agreed to help him. I grabbed my toolbox, turned off the lights, and locked up the shop, leaving with the man. He seemed grateful as we walked towards his car, parked on a secluded road nearby. As we got closer to his vehicle, a sense of unease crept in. The area was eerily quiet, and there was something unsettling about the way the man kept glancing around, as if checking for someone. But I brushed it off, assuming it was just nerves. When we reached his car, I went to inspect the engine. That's when I heard the distinct click of a door locking. I turned around, startled, only to see the man standing by the driver's side, locking the car doors. Panic surged through me, and I banged on the window, demanding he let me out. He turned to me, his eyes cold and calculating. His earlier distress vanished, replaced by something sinister. He muttered something about needing me to fix a different kind of problem. I tried to reason with him, but he ignored me and moved closer, pulling something from his pocket. It was a knife. My heart raced, and I stumbled backward, searching for an escape. I yelled, hoping someone would hear, but the secluded road offered no help. He advanced, his intentions chillingly clear. Adrenaline surged, and I turned to run, but he was faster. He lunged, the knife grazing my arm as I dodged. Fear consumed me, and I sprinted into the woods nearby, hoping to lose him in the darkness. Branches scraped against my skin as I ran, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't dare look back, fearing he was right behind me. I stumbled over roots and rocks, desperation driving me deeper into the woods. I finally found a small clearing, panting and struggling to catch my breath. I tried to compose myself, but the fear was overpowering. I knew I had to keep moving, to find a way out and get help. I heard rustling behind me and whipped around, expecting to see the man. But instead, it was the distant sound of sirens. Relief washed over me as I realized someone must have heard the commotion and called for help. I followed the sound, emerging from the woods near the road. There were flashing lights, and police officers were surrounding the man's car. I stumbled towards them, breathless and covered in dirt, trying to explain what had happened. They listened intently and immediately took action, rushing to find the man. It wasn't long before they found him, hiding not far from where I'd emerged. He was arrested, and I was taken to the hospital to treat the minor wound on my arm. Later, the police explained that the man was wanted for a series of violent crimes. He had lured people in distress, hoping to prey on their kindness. It was chilling to realize how close I had come to being another victim. The experience haunted me for a long time. It shook my trust in people and made me more cautious. I couldn't shake the image of the man's cold eyes or the sound of his footsteps as he chased me through the woods. It was a night of terror that I would never forget. I was doing the late shift at the construction site, wrapping up some final touches on a building project. It was one of those nights when the darkness swallowed everything, except for the stark beams of light from my torch. The site was silent except for the occasional sound of a distant car passing by. As I was surveying the area, my boot accidentally kicked something solid under some loose dirt. I crouched down to inspect, uncovering a trapdoor that had been concealed under debris. It was strange. I'd worked on this site for months and never noticed it before. My curiosity piqued. I lifted the heavy door, revealing a narrow staircase descending into pitch-black darkness. I hesitated, but the sense of mystery pulled me in. I retrieved my torch and cautiously made my way down the steps. The air grew cooler as I descended further into the underground passage. The atmosphere felt stale, as if untouched for years. My torch illuminated the walls, revealing old pipes and layers of dust covering everything. I reached the bottom, finding myself in a small, cramped room with shelves lined with odd containers and dusty books. There were rusted tools scattered around, but what caught my eye were the strange symbols etched into the walls. A shiver ran down my spine. I felt like an intruder in a place that shouldn't exist. I debated whether to stay or leave, but my curiosity got the better of me. I cautiously moved forward, inspecting the objects on the shelves. As I sifted through the items, I noticed a notebook tucked away in a corner. It was filled with cryptic writings and drawings. My heart raced, and an inexplicable dread settled in the pit of my stomach. The more I read, the more unnerved I became. The writings seemed to be about rituals and something about summoning, but it was all gibberish to me. Suddenly, a loud noise echoed from above, startling me. I froze, listening intently, hoping it was just my imagination. But then, there was another sound, definitely footsteps, approaching the trapdoor. Panic surged through me as I quickly turned off my torch and pressed myself against the wall, hiding in the darkness. The trapdoor creaked open, allowing a sliver of light to filter into the room. I held my breath, fearing whoever it was would hear my pounding heart. Footsteps echoed down the staircase, slow and deliberate. I strained to see in the dim light, trying to make out the figure that descended into the hidden chamber. It was a man, but something about him seemed off. He moved with an odd, almost ritualistic rhythm, muttering something under his breath. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I was paralyzed by fear. I watched in horror as the man performed a strange ritual in the center of the room. His words were incomprehensible, but they echoed in the enclosed space, sending chills down my spine. I held my breath, praying he wouldn't notice me. But just as suddenly as he appeared, the man stopped. He glanced around the room, his gaze lingering on the shelves where I had been moments ago. My heart raced, and I braced for the worst. The man's eyes narrowed, and he slowly approached the spot where I had been standing. I pressed myself further against the wall, praying he wouldn't see me. My palms were sweaty, and my heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. He was inches away, and I was certain he could sense my presence. Just as I prepared for the worst, the man abruptly stopped, turned around, and ascended the stairs, closing the trapdoor behind him. I remained frozen in place for what felt like an eternity, my mind racing with fear and confusion. When I finally found the courage, I darted towards the staircase, not looking back, propelled by an overwhelming need to escape. I burst out into the night air, gasping for breath. My hands trembled as I dialed the police, frantically explaining what had happened. They arrived swiftly, but when they searched the hidden chamber, there was nothing, no trapdoor, no underground room, just an empty section of the construction site. I couldn't shake the feeling of dread, the memory of those eerie symbols etched into the walls, or the haunting presence of that man. I was working the night shift, monitoring security cameras in this remote facility. It was one of those places that felt desolate even during the day, and at night, it seemed to become a different world altogether. I kept an eye on the screens, watching for any unusual activities, knowing I was the only one on duty. Everything was quiet until I noticed movement in one of the isolated areas on the cameras. It was supposed to be vacant, miles away from the main complex. At first, I dismissed it as a glitch or maybe an animal wandering around. But then, I saw it again, a shadowy figure lurking at the edge of the frame. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen, trying to make out details. The figure was hunched over, moving slowly and deliberately. My heart quickened. There was something unnerving about the way it moved. I switched to a different camera to get a closer look, but the figure had vanished. I scanned the area, feeling a sense of unease creeping over me. Everything appeared quiet and undisturbed. But then, there it was again, a fleeting glimpse of movement, as if someone was deliberately avoiding the cameras. I focused all my attention on that area, feeling a growing sense of dread. Shadows danced across the screens, and my imagination started to play tricks on me. I was jumpy, convinced I was being watched from somewhere beyond those lenses. I picked up the radio to call for backup or alert someone, but static filled the airwaves. Panic clawed at me, realizing that I was truly alone in this isolated post with whatever was out there. The figure appeared again on one of the screens, closer this time, lingering just at the edge of the camera's range. My heart hammered in my chest as I decided to take action. I grabbed a flashlight and a baton, trying to quell my rising fear. I knew I had to investigate, despite every instinct screaming at me to stay put. Stepping outside, the air was thick with silence, broken only by the sound of my footsteps echoing in the darkness. I navigated towards the area the figure had been spotted, my flashlight casting eerie shadows as I moved cautiously. The tension in the air was palpable, and I could feel my skin prickling with unease. The surroundings seemed almost alive, as if they were hiding something sinister. I reached the area but found nothing except for abandoned equipment and the rustling of leaves in the wind. I swept the flashlight around, scanning every corner, but there was no sign of anyone or anything. Just the vast emptiness of the night. Doubt crept in. Was I imagining things? Was it a trick of the light or exhaustion playing tricks on my mind? I decided to head back, feeling a mixture of relief and lingering apprehension. But as I turned to leave, I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye. I swung the flashlight towards it, illuminating a dark figure standing just a few feet away. My breath caught in my throat as I faced the figure, feeling a cold chill run down my spine. The person, or whatever it was, stood completely still, staring at me with piercing eyes that seemed to glint in the light. I stumbled backward, my heart racing in terror. I tried to call out, but words failed me. There was something off about this figure, a sense of otherness that sent shivers down my spine. Before I could react or make sense of the situation, the figure turned and vanished into the darkness. I stood there, trembling, my mind racing with 1,000 questions and a primal fear that gnawed at my core. I hurried back to the security office, locking the door behind me, and I reached for the radio again, desperate for any connection. But the static persisted, refusing to yield to my pleas for help. I stayed in that room, watching the monitors, expecting that figure to reappear, but there was nothing. No signs of movement, no hint of the unsettling presence I had witnessed. As the night wore on, I tried to shake off the fear, rationalizing it as fatigue or perhaps a mind playing tricks. But deep down, I couldn't shake the feeling that something inexplicable had occurred. When morning finally broke, I was exhausted and on edge, but I was also relieved to see the light of day. I reported what had happened to my supervisor, but the reaction was dismissive, a suggestion that it was likely an animal or my imagination. But I knew what I had seen. It wasn't a trick of the light or a mere illusion. There was something out there, something unexplainable and chilling, lurking in the darkness of that remote area. And that experience would haunt me for a long time to come, leaving me with an unshakable fear of what could exist beyond our understanding. I pulled up to the loading dock, ready to start my delivery shift. It was just another night, or so I thought. The sun had set long ago, casting the streets into an eerie darkness. As I navigated the quiet city roads, I felt a strange sense of unease, like something wasn't quite right. The first stop was at a residential area, a quiet neighborhood, or at least it should have been. I climbed out of the truck with the package in hand and made my way to the front porch. As I approached, I sensed eyes watching me from the shadows. It felt unnerving, but I chalked it up to paranoia. That feeling grew as I delivered the package and turned to leave. A figure lingered in the darkness across the street, unmoving, just watching. I hurried back to my truck, the hairs on the back of my neck standing tall. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting the figure to follow, but it was gone. The next stop was at a small, run-down apartment building. The flickering streetlights added to the eeriness of the place. I knocked on the door, and after what felt like an eternity, someone opened. A person with a vacant stare, muttering incomprehensible words. I handed over the package, eager to leave. I navigated the dimly lit streets, trying to shake off the creeping sense of dread. At the third stop, an abandoned-looking warehouse at the outskirts, I hesitated. The place seemed deserted, but I had a job to do. As I made my way inside, the stillness was oppressive. I placed the box down and turned to leave, but that's when I heard a rustling sound from the dark corners of the warehouse. My heart raced as I hurried back to my truck, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. Things took a turn at the fourth stop, a secluded house on the edge of the city. The porch light flickered ominously. I rang the doorbell, but there was no answer. I called out, announcing the delivery, but there was only silence. Then, a voice, an eerie whisper from the darkened porch, asking me to leave the package and go. I complied, my pulse racing. As I drove to the next stop, I felt eyes on me from every shadow, each corner of the road. The deliveries were getting stranger, the atmosphere more oppressive with each one. At the final stop, a small store in a desolate area, I felt a sense of foreboding settle over me. The dimly lit store stood silent, devoid of any sign of life. I approached, package in hand, and pushed the door open. The store was empty, shelves bare, and the air thick with an unsettling silence. I called out, announcing the delivery, but no response. A chill ran down my spine as I walked further in. Then, a scraping noise from the back room. My heart raced as I cautiously moved toward it, my mind conjuring every terrifying possibility. The store owner stood there, his face contorted in a twisted grin. He muttered something about a gift before disappearing into the darkness. I bolted out of there, heart pounding, my breaths coming in short gasps. I didn't care about the rest of the deliveries, I just wanted to get back to the depot. But the street seemed to twist and elongate, every turn leading me deeper into an unknown territory. I glanced in my rearview mirror, and my heart sank. A shadowy figure, vague yet distinct, followed my every move. Panic surged through me as I tried to lose them, my mind racing with thoughts of who or what it could be. I finally arrived at the depot, shaking and disoriented. I rushed inside, desperate for safety. My supervisor noticed my distress and asked what happened, but I couldn't articulate it. I didn't even understand it myself. I quit that job the next day. Those deliveries felt like a descent into a nightmare, like I'd stumbled into some twilight zone where every stop held a new terror. I still don't know what I encountered that night, but it was enough to make me swear off night shifts for good. There are things out there, things beyond explanation, that I'd rather not know about. I used to work at this bar down on Maple Street, nothing fancy, just a regular place. The night shifts were usually quiet, but sometimes things got a bit hairy. One night, it was busier than usual, and the vibe was off. People were more tense, more on edge, you know? There was this group of guys at the corner table, loud and rowdy, tossing back drinks like water. They seemed okay at first, but as the night went on, they got aggressive, starting fights, yelling at other patrons for no reason. I tried to keep things under control, but they weren't having any of it. One of them, a burly guy with a mean look in his eyes, started harassing a young woman at the bar. She was clearly uncomfortable, and I stepped in, asking him to cool it. That's when things took a turn. He got up, fists clenched, yelling and pushing me, spouting all sorts of threats. I managed to calm the situation down for a bit, but it didn't last. They kept drinking, getting louder and more hostile. It felt like the air in the bar shifted, like something was about to snap. I could see the fear in the other customers' eyes. Then, one of them smashed a glass against the counter, shards flying everywhere. The whole bar went silent, and everyone was on edge. They were taunting me, saying things that sent shivers down my spine. I didn't know if they were drunk or just looking for trouble. I called the cops, but those guys seemed to know something I didn't. They started leaving, one by one, smirking as they did. But the tension lingered in the air even after they were gone. It felt like they left something behind, a sort of darkness that settled over the bar. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that they would come back. I felt paranoid, constantly looking over my shoulder, expecting them to burst in any moment. It was like waiting for a storm to hit. Days passed, and nothing happened. I started to relax, thinking maybe it was just a bad night. But then, they came back, angrier and more aggressive than before. They demanded free drinks, threatening violence if I refused. I tried to reason with them, but they were beyond reason. The situation escalated fast. They were smashing bottles, flipping tables, and terrifying everyone in the bar. I called the cops again, but I knew they wouldn't make it in time. It was just me against them, and I felt utterly helpless. I tried to keep my cool, not show how scared I was, but inside, I was terrified. They were like wild animals, unpredictable and dangerous. They cornered me, hurling threats and insults. I could see the terror in the eyes of the patrons, and I felt responsible for their safety. Then, out of nowhere, they lunged at me, fists flying. I did what I could to defend myself, but it was chaos. I don't remember much after that, just a blur of punches, shouting, and fear. When the cops finally arrived, the damage was done. The bar was in shambles, people were hurt, and those guys were gone. The relief was mixed with this overwhelming sense of fear that they'd come back, finish what they started. Alright, so there was this night, just like any other closing of my burger joint. It was late, and most customers had already left. I was wiping down the tables, getting ready to shut things down when this guy walked in. He looked off from the get-go, you know? Had this unsettling vibe about him. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there by the entrance, staring at me. I asked if I could help him, but he didn't respond. He just wandered over to a table and sat down. I thought maybe he was waiting for someone, but no one else showed up. I figured he'd leave soon, so I started cleaning up, hoping he'd take the hint. But he didn't budge. He just sat there, not ordering anything, not doing anything. It was getting late, and I needed to close, so I politely asked if he needed anything else. That's when things got weird. He looked up at me, and his eyes, they were intense, like he was staring right through me. He didn't answer, just sat there, not moving an inch. I tried to keep my cool, but I was getting creeped out. I told him politely that we were closing up, that he'd have to leave. But he stayed put, like he didn't hear me. I felt this knot in my stomach, like something was off about this guy. I walked over again, trying to be firm, telling him the place was closed, but he just smirked. His grin, it was unsettling, like he was enjoying freaking me out. I asked if he needed help or if he was lost, but he didn't answer. He just stared. I felt this chill run down my spine. It was getting late, and I needed him gone. I told him I was calling the cops if he didn't leave. That's when he finally spoke, but it wasn't what I expected. He said something real nasty, threatening even. It sent shivers down my spine. I reached for the phone, but he stood up, fast. I don't know how to explain it, but his movements were jerky, unnatural. He started walking towards me, slow at first, then quicker. I stepped back, trying to keep my distance. I yelled for him to stop, but he kept coming closer, like he had this sick determination. I grabbed the phone, ready to dial 911, but then he lunged at me. I managed to dodge, but I stumbled, hitting the counter. He was relentless, like he had lost it completely. I made a run for the door, but he was fast, grabbing my arm. His grip, it was like a vice. I struggled, trying to break free, but he was stronger. I screamed for help, hoping someone passing by would hear. He was saying twisted things, threatening me. It was like he had lost touch with reality, completely unhinged. I didn't know what to do. I managed to break away, running towards the back exit. I could hear him following, his footsteps echoing in the empty restaurant. I didn't look back, just pushed through the door, slamming it shut behind me. I ran to my car, fumbling for the keys, and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was far from there. My heart was racing, and I was shaking like a leaf. I didn't understand what had just happened. I called the police and told them everything. They came over, checked the place, but the guy was gone. They said they'd keep an eye out, but I couldn't shake off that feeling of dread. I didn't open up the joint for a few days after that. When I did, I made sure to have someone with me at all times. I couldn't forget that guy's face, the way he looked at me. It was like he wasn't even human. I still wonder what that was all about, why he targeted me like that. It's something that'll stick with me, that sense of fear and helplessness. I hope I never see him again, but I can't shake the feeling that he might come back. So, I used to work the night shift as a security dispatcher. It was usually quiet, you know, just monitoring cameras and responding to alarms. But this one night, everything changed. It started with a distress call, real urgent and panicked. The voice on the other end was frantic, saying something about someone following them. At first, I thought it was a prank, but something in their tone felt off, like they were genuinely scared. They hung up before I could trace the call. Then, things got weirder. I started receiving these cryptic messages, just jumbled up letters and numbers. I thought it was some glitch, but they kept coming, getting more frequent. I tried tracing the source, but it led to dead ends. Another distress call came in, a different voice this time, pleading for help. They said they were being watched, that someone was outside their house. I dispatched a patrol car, but when they arrived, there was no one there. The messages kept coming, and I couldn't shake this feeling of unease. It felt like something was watching me too. I tried calling back the distress callers, but all I got was static or disconnected lines. Then, alarms started going off in different areas, but when I checked the cameras, there was nothing unusual. It was like someone was toying with me, messing with the system. I felt this chill run down my spine, like I was in the middle of some twisted game. More distress calls poured in, each one more panicked than the last. They mentioned seeing shadows outside their windows, hearing strange noises. I dispatched officers to each location, but they found nothing. The messages on my screen became more coherent but just as unsettling. They mentioned my name, details about my life that no one should know. It felt like a violation of my privacy, like someone was watching me through the screen. I tried calling for backup, but my phone suddenly went dead. And that's when the power went out. I was plunged into darkness, surrounded by the eerie silence of the empty office. Panic started creeping in. I grabbed a flashlight and tried to reach the backup generator, but it wouldn't kick in. I felt this sense of dread, like I was completely exposed, vulnerable in the dark. Then, I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing in the hallway outside the office. My heart raced as I pointed the flashlight towards the sound, but there was no one there. It was like the darkness was playing tricks on me. I felt this presence, like someone was in the room with me, breathing down my neck. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response, just a deafening silence. The distress calls kept coming, but they were getting distorted, like they were coming from different dimensions. I couldn't make sense of them, and each one sent a shiver down my spine. I tried reaching out to colleagues, but no one was picking up. I was alone in that eerie darkness, with the feeling that someone or something was watching me. I thought about leaving, just getting out of there, but fear rooted me to the spot. The sense of being hunted, of being a target, was overwhelming. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Then, the lights flickered back on, and the messages stopped. Everything seemed normal again, but I couldn't shake off that feeling of dread. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I reported everything to my supervisor, but they couldn't find any evidence of what happened. It felt like I was losing my mind, but I knew what I experienced was real. Even after I left the office that night, the feeling of being watched lingered. It was like whatever had happened followed me home, a lingering sense of terror that I couldn't shake off. That night changed something in me, made me question everything, and left me with this lingering fear of the unknown. I remember that night vividly. I was the janitor at a corporate office building, and I was tasked with cleaning up after everyone had left. I liked the job, it was peaceful, and I could work without any interruptions. But that night, it was different. As I went about my routine, I started noticing strange things. Doors that I knew I'd locked were ajar. Lights that I'd switched off were flickering back on. I figured it was just some electrical issue, or perhaps I'd been forgetful, but it still sent a shiver down my spine. Then came the whispers. Faint voices that seemed to echo through the empty corridors. I brushed it off as my mind playing tricks, the silence of the office magnifying every little sound. But the voices persisted, and they sounded like they were coming from just around the corner, yet no one was there. I kept cleaning, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. But then, I saw something, a shadow flitting across the wall. It was so fast that I convinced myself it was just a play of light, but my heart raced. As I continued, I heard footsteps echoing in the hallway. Clear, distinct footsteps, yet there was no one else in the building. I called out, thinking maybe someone had stayed behind, but there was no response, just the eerie sound of those footsteps fading into silence. I felt a chill crawl up my spine as I quickened my pace. My hands trembled as I worked, the hairs on the back of my neck standing on end. The office felt different that night, like it held secrets it didn't want me to know. Then, there were the sightings. Out of the corner of my eye, I glimpsed figures moving, flickering shadows that vanished when I turned to look directly at them. I tried to tell myself it was exhaustion or stress, but the feeling of being watched never left me. The atmosphere grew heavy, almost oppressive, and the air seemed charged with an unseen tension. Every little sound made me jump. I'd catch glimpses of something, a shape or a movement, but when I turned, there was nothing there. The last straw was when I went to the restroom. In the mirror's reflection, I saw a face, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to bore into mine. I stumbled backward, my heart pounding, but when I looked back, there was no one behind me. I wanted to leave, but I had a job to finish. I was about to call it a night when the lights started flickering wildly, plunging parts of the office into darkness. Panic gripped me as I fumbled for my phone, trying to call security, but the signal was dead. I decided to head to the main exit, my heart racing. But as I walked down the corridor, I heard it, a low, guttural growl that seemed to reverberate through the walls. It was unlike anything I'd ever heard, sending a cold shiver down my spine. I broke into a run, sprinting towards the exit. The building seemed to stretch endlessly, the corridors twisted and turned in ways I didn't remember. Panic seized me, and I felt like I was trapped in a maze, the exit constantly out of reach. As I rounded a corner, I almost collided with someone or something. A figure stood there, partially hidden in the shadows, its eyes gleaming in the dim light. My breath hitched, and I stumbled backward, trying to find another way out. But the figure didn't move, it just stood there, watching. I turned and ran in the opposite direction, praying I'd find an exit. The whispers grew louder, and the air felt charged with an unnatural energy. I finally reached the main lobby, but the doors were locked, chains barring them shut. Panic surged through me. I was trapped. I banged on the doors, screaming for help, but my voice echoed through the empty halls. That's when I heard it, the sound of heavy breathing, right behind me. I turned, and there it was, a figure looming in the shadows, its eyes fixed on me. I felt frozen, unable to move, as it took a step closer. Then, suddenly, the lights flickered back on, flooding the lobby. I blinked, expecting the figure to vanish, but it was gone. The chains on the doors were gone too, and I stumbled outside, gasping for air. I never returned to that office at night. I quit my job, unable to shake off the terror of that experience. People said I imagined it all, that it was stress or tiredness. But I know what I saw and felt that night, and I'll never forget the inexplicable horror that lurked within those walls. Alright, so I used to work the night shift at a call center. It was usually quiet, you know, the usual calls about billing issues or tech problems. But this one night, things took a weird turn. It started with this call, and I picked it up, like any other call. At first, there was just heavy breathing on the line, like someone was trying to catch their breath. I thought maybe it was a bad connection or something. But then this voice came on, shaky and all messed up. They sounded scared, like something real bad was happening. They wouldn't say who they were or where they were calling from, just kept rambling on about seeing things, disturbing things. They mentioned shadows moving, following them everywhere they went. I thought it was a prank, but something about their voice felt real, like they were genuinely terrified. They said they were being watched, but when I asked by who, they'd go silent. It was like they were whispering, but not to me, to someone else in the room. I tried to keep them on the line, calm them down, but they kept getting more and more agitated. I checked the caller ID, but it showed up as unknown. No way to trace it. That's when things got real creepy. The person started talking about things they shouldn't know, like personal stuff about me, my name, where I lived. It was impossible. I was getting goosebumps, feeling this sense of dread creeping up. I tried to end the call, but they wouldn't let me. They kept saying they needed help, that something was after them. I wanted to help, but I didn't know how. Then they started describing things, like my room, details only someone who's been there could know. It was like they were watching me. I checked my surroundings, but there was no one there. I tried to stay calm, keep the caller on the line, hoping to get some clue about where they were. But the more they talked, the more twisted and dark it got. They said they were seeing things, like twisted figures in the darkness, but I couldn't see anything on my end. Their voice changed, got all shaky and distant, like they were slipping away. They started mumbling about something coming for them, and then the line went dead. I tried calling back, but it just kept ringing. I reported it to my supervisor, but they said it was probably a prank call. But it didn't feel like a prank. It felt real, like someone was in danger. After that call, I couldn't shake off this feeling of being watched. I'd look over my shoulder, expecting to see someone there. Every little sound made me jump, like someone was lurking in the shadows. I used to work the night shift down at the docks. It was quiet most nights, just loading and unloading cargo. But this one night, things got weird. There was this shipment that came in, real odd-looking crates, covered in weird markings. I didn't think much of it at first, just another job. But then these guys showed up to collect the crates. They were shady, wearing dark clothes and sunglasses, even though it was nighttime. Gave me the creeps. They kept eyeing the crates, talking in hushed tones, looking around like they were expecting trouble. I overheard snippets of their conversation, something about the cargo being sensitive and valuable. It made me curious, but I knew better than to get involved. When they started loading the crates onto their truck, I noticed something off. They were handling them real careful, like they were fragile or something. But these guys didn't look like they cared much about being gentle with stuff. As they were about to leave, one of the crates slipped, just a little. And I saw it, something metallic glinting inside. It didn't look like any normal cargo. I felt this knot in my stomach, like something was really off about those crates. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it wasn't my business. But then I saw one of the guys. He had this weird tattoo on his arm, some kind of symbol. It sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't know what it meant, but it felt wrong. I thought about calling the authorities, but I didn't want trouble. I finished my shift, trying to push those thoughts out of my head. But when I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about those crates, those guys. It was late, but I couldn't shake off this feeling of unease. I kept thinking about that cargo. What if it was something dangerous? What if those guys were up to no good? I decided to drive back to the docks, just to check things out. When I got there, the place was deserted. No sign of those crates or the truck. I felt this sinking feeling, like I had missed something important. I walked around, trying to find any clues, when I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. My heart was pounding, and I started getting real nervous. I felt like I was being watched. Then, I saw a figure in the distance, moving between the shipping containers. I called out, asking if someone was there, but they didn't respond. It was like they were trying to hide. I approached cautiously, feeling this sense of dread growing. The figure disappeared behind a stack of containers, and when I got there, there was nothing. It was like they vanished into thin air. I heard voices, hushed whispers coming from nearby. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it didn't sound friendly. I wanted to get out of there, but my curiosity got the better of me. I followed the voices, trying to stay hidden. And that's when I saw them, those same guys from earlier, gathered around one of the containers. They were arguing, pointing at something inside. I couldn't see clearly, but it looked like they were handling something dangerous. I knew I had to do something, call for help or something. But my phone was dead, and I was too far from the main office to reach for help. I stepped on something, making a noise, and they all turned towards me. I froze, feeling this surge of fear. They started walking towards me, slowly, like predators closing in on prey. I turned to run, but one of them grabbed my arm. He whispered something threatening, telling me to keep my mouth shut. I managed to break free and ran as fast as I could. I didn't stop until I was far from the docks. My heart was racing, and I felt this terror gripping me. I didn't know what those guys were up to, but it felt dangerous, like I stumbled onto something I shouldn't have. I reported it to the authorities, but when they checked the docks, there was no trace of those guys or the mysterious cargo. It felt like a nightmare, like I had walked into something way over my head. Even after that night, I couldn't shake off that feeling of being watched. I kept looking over my shoulder, scared those guys might come after me. It was like I had stumbled into something dark and dangerous, and I couldn't escape it. I used to work as a park ranger, and let me tell you, most nights were quiet, just me patrolling the grounds. But this one night, things took a turn for the worse. I was doing my usual rounds when I heard voices, real low and harsh, like they were arguing. I followed the sound, trying to figure out what was going on. It was pitch black, and my flashlight was barely cutting through the darkness. That's when I saw them, two guys, both looking rough, real shady. They were talking in hushed tones, but it didn't sound friendly. I thought maybe they were lost or something, but their body language was off, real aggressive. I called out to them, asking if they needed help, but they just turned towards me, and something about their expressions gave me the chills. I tried to keep calm, telling them I was a ranger, there to assist if needed. But they didn't seem interested in that. They started walking towards me, slow but purposeful, and I felt this knot in my stomach. It was like they were sizing me up. I asked again if everything was okay, trying to defuse the situation, but they didn't respond. It felt like they were closing in, and that's when I noticed something shiny in one of their hands. It looked like a knife, and my heart started racing. I took a step back, trying to keep a distance, but they kept coming closer. I felt this surge of fear, like I was in danger. I radioed for backup, hoping someone would hear, but the reception was poor, and I wasn't sure if anyone got the message. I tried to reason with them, telling them to back off, that I didn't want any trouble. But they just sneered, and that's when they lunged at me. I dodged the attack, stumbling back, and I knew I had to get out of there. I turned to run, but they were fast, chasing after me. I heard their footsteps, getting closer, and I felt this panic rising inside me. I sprinted through the trees, trying to lose them, but they were right behind me. I didn't know where I was going, just running blindly, hoping I'd find some place to hide. My breath was ragged, and fear was making my heart pound so loud, I thought they'd hear it. I stumbled upon this old abandoned cabin, and without thinking twice, I darted inside, trying to catch my breath. I hid in the shadows, praying they hadn't seen where I went. I heard their voices outside, cursing and searching for me. I stayed as quiet as I could, trying to control my breathing. It felt like an eternity, waiting for them to leave. Eventually, their voices faded, and I peeked out cautiously. I didn't see them anywhere, but I didn't want to take any chances. I waited a while longer, making sure it was safe before I dared to leave the cabin. I radioed for help again, telling them what happened. Backup arrived, but those guys were long gone. They searched the area, but there was no trace of them. I reported everything to the authorities, but without much to go on, there wasn't a lot they could do. It left me shaken, knowing how close I came to something real dangerous. After that night, I was always on edge during my patrols. I couldn't shake off that feeling of being watched, like those guys might come back. It was like a nightmare that didn't end, and I felt like I was always looking over my shoulder. My name is Billy, and I used to work the night shift at this hotel, checking in guests, handling the paperwork, and all that. But this one night, things got real weird. I was going through the records, doing the usual audit, when I noticed something off. There were these discrepancies in the records, bookings that didn't add up. Rooms were marked as vacant, but I swear I remembered checking someone into those rooms earlier. It felt like something wasn't right, like someone was messing with the records. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe I made a mistake, but then I noticed more odd things. Some guests were listed as checked out, but their belongings were still in the rooms. It was like they disappeared into thin air. I felt this chill creeping up my spine, like there was something shady going on. I checked the security footage, but it was all glitchy, like someone tampered with it. It made me real uneasy. Then, I started getting these calls from guests, complaining about strange noises in their rooms, like whispers or footsteps. They said they felt like they were being watched. It made my skin crawl. I tried to reassure them, saying it was probably just the old building settling or something, but I couldn't shake off the feeling that something wasn't right. It was like the hotel had this eerie vibe, like there was something lurking in the shadows. As I went through the records, I found bookings for rooms that didn't exist. I checked the floor plans, and there was no such room number. It made no sense. I thought maybe it was a mistake, but the more I looked, the more these strange entries popped up. I tried to reach out to my manager, but I couldn't get through. It felt like I was on my own, dealing with this bizarre situation. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't abandon my shift, and there was this feeling like I had to figure out what was going on. I went up to the floors, checking the rooms myself. Some doors were locked from the inside, and when I knocked, there was no answer. It gave me this unsettling feeling, like someone was hiding in there. Then I stumbled upon this room, but one that wasn't supposed to exist. It was like a blank space on the floor plan, but there it was, a door where no door should be. I felt this dread sinking in. I tried the handle, and it was unlocked. The room was freezing cold, even though the air conditioning was off. There was this stale smell, like something rotten. It made my stomach turn. I stepped inside, and it was dark, pitch black. I felt my way around, trying to find a light switch. When I finally did, what I saw, I can't even explain. The room was empty, but it felt wrong. It was like the air was heavy with something sinister. I heard this whispering, real faint at first, like distant voices. It made the hairs on my neck stand up. I called out, asking if anyone was there, but there was no response. Just this eerie silence. I wanted to get out of there, but I felt glued to the spot. It was like something was holding me back. The whispers grew louder, and I felt this overwhelming sense of fear, like I was in danger. I stumbled back, trying to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. It was like it was stuck, like it didn't want to open. Panic started setting in, and I pounded on the door, calling for help, but no one came. I don't know how, but suddenly the door swung open, and I bolted out of there. I ran down to the lobby, trying to make sense of what happened. But when I checked the records again, that room wasn't there, like it never existed. I wanted to leave, get away from that place, but something kept pulling me back. I felt this lingering sense of dread, like whatever was in that room followed me. I quit that job soon after, but the fear, it stayed with me, haunting me like a nightmare that wouldn't end. I was doing the late shift at the store, like always. It was quiet, real quiet. The bell on the door jingled, and this guy walked in. He was tall, wearing a hoodie pulled real low, hiding his face. Gave me the shivers, you know? He walked real slow, taking his time with every step. I asked if he needed help, but he didn't say a word. Just kept walking, like he didn't hear me. He went down an aisle, and I could feel my heart racing. Something about him just didn't feel right. I tried to focus on restocking the shelves, but I couldn't shake this feeling, like something was off. I peeked down the aisle he was in, and he was just standing there, not looking at anything on the shelves. Just standing. Gave me the creeps. I pretended to be busy, but I was watching him. He suddenly turned and started walking towards the counter. My stomach tightened up. I could feel my hands getting sweaty. He finally reached the counter, and I managed to ask if he found everything okay. He didn't respond, just placed a couple of items on the counter. His eyes, they were cold, like they were staring right through me. I tried to ring up his stuff, but my hands were shaking. I was struggling to scan the items, dropping them a couple of times. He just stood there, not moving, not saying a word. Then he leaned in real close. His breath smelled weird, like something rotten. He whispered, "You shouldn't be here alone." That sent chills down my spine. I wanted to scream for help, but my voice got stuck in my throat. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. He paid in cash, exact change, and left without another word. I tried to calm myself down, but I was freaked out. I locked the door behind him, feeling safer now that he was gone. I checked the security cameras, but he wasn't on them. It was like he vanished. I called the cops, but they said there wasn't much they could do. I couldn't shake the feeling that something bad was going to happen. I kept looking over my shoulder, jumping at every sound. Hours passed, and it was almost closing time. I started cleaning up, trying to keep busy. Then I heard a noise from the back of the store. My heart stopped. I grabbed a broomstick, my hands trembling. I slowly made my way toward the sound, my palms sweating, my breaths coming up fast and shallow. There, in the shadows, I saw movement. I froze, my eyes fixed on that spot. Then he stepped into the dim light, that unsettling guy from earlier. My mind was racing. How did he get back in? What did he want? He just stood there, staring at me with those cold, empty eyes. I managed to stammer, asking what he wanted. He didn't say a word. He took a step closer, and that's when I lost it. I ran to the front of the store, locking myself in the office, heart pounding in my ears. I could hear footsteps, slow and deliberate, getting closer and closer. I grabbed my phone, ready to call the cops again. But then, everything went silent. I didn't hear a thing. I stayed in that office for what felt like hours, too scared to come out. When I finally mustered the courage to check, he was gone. Vanished again. I was doing the night shift at the cemetery. It's not the coziest place at night, you know? But it's a job. I've been here for a while now, just making sure everything's okay, nothing out of the ordinary. But this one night, it was different. I was checking the grounds, doing my rounds as usual. It was quiet, real quiet. Then I heard this sound, like footsteps, but there was no one around. My heart started racing. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks, but the sound kept getting closer, like someone walking on gravel. I turned around, shining my flashlight, but there was no one there. Just an empty path. I tried to shake it off, thinking it was maybe an animal or something. But the feeling, that eerie feeling, it stayed with me. I kept on with my rounds, trying to ignore the chill running down my spine. Then I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I turned, and there was this figure, like a shadow, standing by a grave. I froze. I swear I could feel my heart in my throat. But when I shone the light, there was nobody there. Just an empty patch of grass. I tried to convince myself it was a trick of the light, but I couldn't shake off that feeling. I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like someone was watching me. The air felt heavy, like something wasn't right. Then, I heard this whisper. Soft, but it felt like it was right next to me. My skin prickled. I turned around, but there was no one there. I felt this cold breeze, but it wasn't windy. I was spooked. I decided to head back to the caretaker's shed, feeling safer there. But as I walked, I heard these voices, faint, like murmurs in the distance. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but it made my blood run cold. I got to the shed and locked myself in, trying to calm down. But then I heard knocking on the door, slow and deliberate. My heart raced. I didn't dare open it, but the knocking didn't stop. It sounded like it was coming from inside the shed. I checked all the windows, but there was nobody outside. The knocking continued, getting louder, more insistent. I felt trapped. I couldn't explain it. There was nobody there, but the knocking, it was like it was coming from the walls themselves. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal. It felt like the air was getting colder, and I could see my breath. I felt this presence, this heaviness in the room, like something was there with me. Then, just as sudden as it started, the knocking stopped. It was dead silent. I stayed in that shed until sunrise, too scared to move. When daylight came, I bolted out of there, never looking back. I couldn't shake off what happened that night. I never told anyone, afraid they'd think I was crazy. But I couldn't go back to that job. That experience, those eerie occurrences, they still haunt me. And every time I pass by that cemetery, I can't help but feel that unsettling feeling all over again. I was out there fixing roads at night, like I always did. It was quiet, just the sound of my tools and the occasional car passing by. But then, things started feeling off. I noticed these strange lights in the distance, flickering. I thought it was just my imagination, but they seemed to be getting closer. I tried to focus on my work, but that uneasy feeling lingered. Then, I heard footsteps behind me. I spun around, but there was nobody there. I shrugged it off, figuring it was maybe an animal or something. I kept working, but then I heard whispers, faint at first, then getting louder. It felt like they were all around me, but I couldn't make out any words. My heart started pounding, and I just wanted to finish and get out of there. The lights were getting brighter now, and I could see figures moving in the distance. I couldn't quite make out what they were, but they didn't look like people. I tried to ignore it, thinking it was just fatigue playing tricks on my mind. Then, my tools started disappearing. I'd set them down, turn around for a moment, and they'd be gone. I searched everywhere, but they were nowhere to be found. I felt this sense of being watched, like someone was messing with me. I heard laughter, distant and eerie. My stomach churned. I didn't want to admit it, but I was scared. I wanted to leave, but I needed my tools to finish the job. I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, shadows darting around. I turned, but there was nothing there. I tried to keep my cool, but I was freaking out inside. Then, the road signs started changing. I swear they were pointing in different directions than they were before. I knew these roads like the back of my hand, and something wasn't right. I felt this cold breeze, even though it wasn't windy. It made the hairs on my neck stand up. I was alone out there, and it felt like the world was playing tricks on me. I tried to call for help, but my phone had no signal. I was completely cut off. Panic started creeping in. I just wanted to get out of there, but I didn't know which way to go. I finally decided to follow one of the signs, hoping it would lead me back to the main road. But as I walked, the road seemed endless. It was like I was going in circles, no matter which direction I took. The figures I saw earlier, they were getting closer now. They didn't look human, more like shadows. I wanted to run, but my legs felt like they were glued to the ground. I could hear their voices now, whispering my name. It sent shivers down my spine. I felt this overwhelming sense of dread, like I was trapped in a nightmare. I stumbled upon a clearing, and there they were, those shadowy figures, surrounding me. I couldn't move. I could feel their presence, this dark energy that made my skin crawl. And then, just like that, everything went silent. The figures vanished, and I was alone again. I ran as fast as I could, not looking back, not stopping until I reached the main road. I quit that job the next day. I couldn't shake off that night, those unsettling events. It felt like I had stepped into some twisted reality, and I never wanted to experience anything like it again. I was working late at the office, trying to wrap up some important stuff. It was just me and this new security guard who had come on shift. I hadn't seen him before, but I figured he was doing his rounds. I kept my head down, trying to finish up. But then, I felt this strange vibe when he walked by my desk. I couldn't put my finger on it, but something about him just gave me the chills. He had this unsettling look in his eyes, like he was staring right through me. I tried to brush it off and focus on my work. As the night went on, I needed to get some documents from the filing room. I saw him standing there, near the entrance, almost like he was waiting for me. I gave a polite nod, but he didn't acknowledge me. He just kept staring, and it made me feel uneasy. I brushed past him and entered the filing room. I was searching through the files when I heard the door creak. I turned around, and there he was, just standing in the doorway. I felt this shiver down my spine. I asked if he needed something, but he didn't respond. He just kept staring at me with this cold, vacant look. I tried to ignore it and continued my work, but I could feel his eyes on me the whole time. It made my skin crawl. I started feeling paranoid, like I was being watched. I kept glancing back at him, and he hadn't moved an inch, just standing there, motionless. I finished up and headed back to my desk, hoping to just focus and get out of there. But as I walked by him, he whispered something under his breath. I couldn't quite catch it, but it sent shivers down my spine. I quickened my pace, feeling this sense of urgency to leave. I was packing my stuff when I realized he was now standing at the entrance of the office. I didn't remember him moving from the filing room, but there he was, just staring at me. I felt this knot in my stomach, this overwhelming fear. I tried to act normal, gathering my things, but I could sense him watching my every move. I felt trapped, like I couldn't escape. I wanted to call for help, but my voice got stuck in my throat. I made a run for the exit, heart pounding in my chest. As I passed him, he reached out, almost as if to grab me. I flinched and darted away, racing out of the office. I didn't stop running until I reached the safety of my car. I locked the doors, shaking uncontrollably. I looked back at the office, but he wasn't there. I felt this overwhelming relief, but also this lingering fear. I called my boss and told him everything. He said they checked the security footage, but when they did, there was no sign of the new guard. It was like he was never there. I couldn't shake off that encounter. That feeling of dread, those cold eyes, it stayed with me. I made sure never to work late alone after that. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, and I never wanted to experience anything like it again. I was on my usual late-night shift driving the bus. It was quiet, like always. Not a single soul on board, just me and the empty seats. But then, out of nowhere, this guy comes out of the dark and flags down the bus. He looked strange, wearing a long coat that covered most of his face. I thought it was odd, but I let him on. He didn't say a word, just dropped his fare into the box and went to the back of the bus. I could feel this weird vibe coming off him. I tried to focus on the road, but something about him made me uneasy. I glanced at the rearview mirror, and he was just sitting there, not moving, not looking out the window, just staring at me. It made my skin crawl. I tried to brush it off, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept driving, trying not to think about him. But every time I checked the mirror, he was still there, just staring at me with these cold, dead eyes. I could feel the tension rising. I wanted to ask if he was okay, but something held me back. It felt like he didn't want to be disturbed. I kept driving, trying to focus on the road, but I could feel his presence, this heavy weight on my shoulders. The bus was completely silent, except for the sound of the engine. It felt suffocating. I wanted to turn on some music or something, but I didn't want to draw attention to myself. I just wanted him off the bus. I reached a stop, and I hoped he'd get off, but he didn't move. He just sat there, staring. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to scream, but I didn't want to cause a scene. I decided to confront him, ask if everything was all right. I turned around, ready to speak, but he was gone, vanished into thin air. I checked the entire bus, but there was no sign of him. It was like he was never there. I felt this overwhelming sense of relief, but also this lingering fear. I couldn't explain it. I tried to focus on driving, but I couldn't shake off that encounter. It felt surreal, like a nightmare. I finished my shift and parked the bus at the depot. I told my supervisor about the strange passenger, but when we checked the security footage, there was no record of him boarding or leaving the bus. I couldn't stop thinking about it. That guy, those eyes, it stayed with me. I started having nightmares about him, this chilling encounter playing on repeat in my mind. I worked the night shift at the warehouse, like every night. It was just me and the hum of the machines. But one night, something felt off. I saw these 4 guys hanging around outside the building when I took a break. They looked out of place, like they didn't belong there. I didn't pay much attention and went back to work. But then, I heard these footsteps. I turned, and there they were, those same guys, standing at the entrance. I felt this knot in my stomach, this sudden fear creeping in. I asked if I could help them, but they didn't say a word. They just stood there, staring at me. It was eerie, the way they looked, almost like they were sizing me up. I felt this chill run down my spine, but I tried to play it cool, act like everything was normal. I went back to my work, but I could feel their eyes on me the whole time. It made it hard to focus. I decided to take another break and went outside. But when I stepped out, they were there again, just standing, watching. I felt this sense of dread, like something bad was about to happen. I hurried back inside, trying to ignore them. But then, I heard this banging on the door. It was loud, like they were trying to break in. My heart started racing. I didn't know what to do. I called the security, but they said there was no one outside the building. I felt this panic rising, like I was losing my mind. I knew what I saw, but they weren't there anymore. I locked myself in the office, trying to calm down. But then, I heard these whispers, faint at first, then getting louder. It sounded like their voices, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. It sent shivers down my spine. I peeked through the window, and there they were, standing in a circle outside the office. I couldn't see their faces, just their silhouettes. I felt this overwhelming fear, like I was trapped. I called the police, but when they arrived, there was nobody there. No trace of those guys. I felt this sense of relief, but also this lingering terror. I finished my shift and left the warehouse, constantly looking over my shoulder. I couldn't shake off that encounter. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. I started having trouble sleeping, those 4 guys haunting my dreams. I didn't feel safe anymore, like they were still out there, watching, waiting. It was the scariest thing I've ever experienced, and I prayed I'd never see them again.